Joining me now is Cleodie Rickard, who is the Trade Champion Manager at Global Justice. Hello, Cleodie.
Hi, how are you going?
I'm doing well, thank you. So how significant is this trade deal between UK and India, both economically and politically?
Well, I mean, the government's calling this a landmark deal, and it's certainly significant as the first agreement to be signed since the Labour government published its trade strategy just a month ago, and it's coming after about 3 years of negotiations with India. But I mean, the government's own assessment has just shown it's only going to add 0.13% to UK GDP, and I think it's only about 0.06 to India's. So in our kind of economically turbulent times, this is kind of little more than a rounding error. So I think the kind of political significance of the trade deal is really about what its costs are. And in particular, I'm talking about for the climate, for development and for human rights. And Labour have kind of called for an end to the era of big, unwieldy free trade agreements, but they've kind of pressed ahead with many of these Tory-era deals with India. One with the Gulf states is on the cards, and until recently, Israel were kind of top of their list. And these are administrations who are, quite frankly, fairly preposterous bedfellows to have if the UK wants to align its trade policy with its climate and human rights commitments. We're a little bit worried that, the UK's quite conspicuous silence around Modi's persecution of the Muslim population in India and civil society, this kind of sending the wrong political signal. But, it kind of only tracks with Starmer overseeing his own set of fairly draconian civil liberties policies here in the UK as well.
Yeah, it is definitely interesting. And what are the expected benefits of UK industries like the automotive and whiskey, and for Indian exports like textiles and jewellery?
I mean, yeah, it's true that the trade deal does slash tariffs and secures market access for those sectors. So it will benefit some companies in these industries. But I think the kind of bigger picture here is the prioritising of corporate access over the public interest. So what the trade deal is missing is a binding protections for workers' rights and environmental standards for public health. So it's kind of a model of trade which focuses on quite short-term economic gains rather than like long-term people and planet-centered development. I think an instructive example is the quite hard-fought battle over the deal's intellectual property chapter. And it's a bit technical, but the UK, lobbied by big pharmaceutical companies, was pushing for India to water down its safeguards it has that lets its own companies make patented drugs at reduced prices during public health emergencies. And India hasn't caved totally on this, but we do worry that certain measures written into the deal lay the groundwork for undermining India's generics drug industry in future. And that can make it a lot harder for people around the world who need it most to access life-saving medicines. And it could even raise prices that the NHS here pays for drugs.
Now, the government says the deal will boost trade and create jobs. Do you agree with that assessment, and who will benefit the most?
I mean, yeah, the deal is expected to boost trade in goods and services between the two countries. But, that's not to say that the economic benefits of these will be felt by ordinary people in both countries. It's going to be hard to know how many jobs come of it, especially when the UK didn't commit to having independent impact assessments of trade deals in its trade strategy. What it does do is kind of continue the process of neoliberalisation, which has been happening in India since the 1990s. And many of our civil society partners in India argue that this has kind of rapidly increased inequality and support for the extreme right in the country. So, this market access by foreign companies doesn't always equal jobs. It often kind of spells disaster for people's livelihoods. I mean, look at the enormous farmers' protests that happened in India from the pressures of its agricultural sector being kind of opened up to global trade.
And the deal includes a joint plan to tackle illegal migration. What do we know about that and how that might work?
Well, I mean, I don't personally have all the details about this joint plan on migration. It's a slightly parallel to the trade agreement. But what I would say is that I think if Starmer and Modi see our two countries' trade relationship as the avenue to address issues of irregular migration, it's a shame that they're signing a trade deal which risks kind of exacerbating some of those root causes of why people move, because maybe they're not seeing the benefits of neoliberal policies trickle down to them, or maybe their countries are being increasingly affected by climate impacts, for example. So, I mean, I would say what we need are safe routes rather than punitive measures.
It definitely seems that this deal has many layers to it, above the economic and political motives. Mm-hmm. And some critics say the extended social security terms that could undercut, British workers. How valid are those concerns?
I mean, I think in terms of the social security terms extension, I think it's worth saying that the UK has similar arrangements with the EU and a number of other countries, and Indian companies will still pay social security contributions on salaries in India, and similar provisions will be available to UK businesses who are seconding employees to India. So it's not imbalanced in that way, but I think we should maybe be a bit less concerned about like the flow of important parts of our workforces, which is very restricted and subject to a lot of conditions, and maybe focus on the way that this trade deal and other trade deals kind of really release the fetters on the flow of capital. And it means that the big businesses who are engaging in a kind of race to the bottom around the world in terms of paying conditions. And it's a shame that the UK-India deal has failed in its chance to mitigate this, which it could have done by putting in place a binding chapter on workers' rights.
And finally, Cleodie, where does this deal fit into the UK's broader post-Brexit trade strategy?
I mean, unfortunately, I think it kind of just continues the inconsistency. I mean, as the post-Brexit trade policy has slightly been more PR exercise than much else. I mean, the government has claimed it wants to, drop post-imperial delusions in its trade policy, which is, a good ambition. But this would require a really radical rethink of how the UK approaches its relationship to countries in the global south, and pursuing much more like reciprocal arrangements and transforming international trade to support sustainable development around the world. And this inconsistency is quite evident when you see that the parallel bilateral investment treaty that they also tried to get over the line with India, they failed to, because the two countries are still arguing over this little known but quite dangerous trade rule called Investor State Dispute Settlement, or ISDS. And these are corporate courts that let foreign companies sue governments in secret tribunals over policies that they allege harm their profits. And India's been trying to pursue reforms to this system, but the UK, again lobbied by the City of London, is trying to get these rowed back in this investment treaty. So ultimately, if the government wants to use trade to build a fairer world, a greener world, this deal isn't the way to do it, and nor are the corporate courts it's pursuing in the investment treaty. So I think we need a trade policy that's reoriented to put public welfare over private profit.